Hello and a very good morning to you all. I'm Kazmira Jefford. I'm the editor of Geneva Solutions, a news platform dedicated to international Geneva. As you saw, before, welcome to this panel on advancing science for ocean stewardship. As you saw in the video we just watched, ocean stewardship is one of the 18 scientific topics in GESDA's Science Breakthrough Radar, which was launched, as you all know, this week. The Radar is a new decision-making open source platform developed by GESDA with more than 500 scientists. And the aim is to assess the next big breakthroughs in science in 5, 10, and 25 years from now. So this by involving from the start, not only scientists, but also diplomats, philanthropists, entrepreneurs, civil society, and the general public. And that's why we're all here today. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our star panel. I cannot do their fascinating careers here justice in a couple of lines. So if you don't know them already, I'd recommend looking them up afterwards and reading about their work. But just briefly, I'll start with the panelists online. We have Jared Barron, who's the CEO and chairman of the metals company in Canada, which is seeking to mine nodules of metals sitting on the ocean floor to fuel the next generation of electric cars. And the argument here that this would have a lower environmental and social impact than current mining practices online, amongst other things. And then we have Robert Blasiak, who is a researcher at the Stockholm Resilience Centre, where he focuses on international cooperation and ocean stewardship. He's published many papers for the high-level panel for sustainable ocean economy, in particular on the ocean genome. Then we have Antje Boetjes, who is a renowned marine biologist who's taken part in almost 50 expeditions on international research vessels, I believe. She's the director of the Center for Polar and Marine Research at the Alfred Wegener Institute in Germany. Then to my left, starting on the far left, we have Vladimir Ryabinin, who is the Executive Secretary of UNESCO's Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, the IOC, in Russia. He spent an extensive and broad career in the field as an oceanographer, marine engineer, meteorologist, and climatologist. And to my left also, Anders Meiboom, who's the leader of the Biological Geochemistry Lab here at the EPFL. He founded the Transnational Red Sea Center, a science and diplomacy initiative exploring heat-resistant corals in the Red Sea. And we also have the pleasure of having in the audience with us Andre Hoffman, an environmentalist, philanthropist, vice chairman of Hoffman La Roche, and president of the Marva Foundation. So thank you. And thank you to all of you for being here today. So to start off with, we've got a question for you, the audience. Only 80% of the ocean has been explored, yet we know that within that big unknown lies a treasure trove, as the video put it, of biochemicals that could and are already contributing to advances in science. At the same time, human activity and climate change are putting an immense strain on the ocean. So the question to you is, and I should be here on the screen, knowing that marine genetics could majorly contribute to sectors such as pharmacology, how to better govern the ocean and prevent its overuse. So we've got the 3 answers there for you to choose from, and we invite you to take out your mobile phone and open any web browser and type in the address sli.do. Where you'll be asked to be a participant. Please introduce hashtag GESDA21, and then you should be able to see the questions there on your screen. So should we prevent its overuse and better govern the ocean with an ambitious charter, globally signed and implemented with defined targets, objectives, and rigorous monitoring? B, with an open, global, and scientific owned platform, centralizing all the data on marine life and indicators for policymaking? Or C, with an independent global ocean keeping body in partnership with scientists? And we'll give you a few minutes to chew on that. So no one for the third one so far. This is interesting. So 67% so far with an open, global, and scientific owned platform, centralizing all data on marine life. No, it's changing fast. Okay, so as we see those answers coming in, then maybe I'll just turn first then to Anders Meiben. I mean, what's your take on the answers that have been picked? What would your choice be?
Well, I think it's a bit of a mixture of all of it, right? I think when it comes to ocean protection, the marriage between science and diplomacy is absolutely essential. It's not just that it's a good idea; it's essential. It's a necessity. We have on one hand a necessity to understand our ecosystems, at a very deep level if we have to protect them. On the other hand, we have to have international collaboration, especially when it comes to the oceans, because there are no real boundaries for pollution, and the extraction of resources have to be controlled by the international community. Now, that's why, of course, I'm a big fan of what GESDA is doing and the whole philosophy, because this marriage between science and diplomacy is, to me, absolutely essential in this regard. After that, it's a question of scale, and that is touched upon by these questions. It's the question of what is the scale at which things will actually be efficient. Is it a global scale? Is it a global charter? Or do we have to focus more regionally to actually be pragmatic and effective? Now, and what are the ingredients that are needed to create the right collaborations, both scientifically and in terms of governance? In terms of scale, if you talk about scale, I am actually of the opinion that once we go global, we talk about global initiatives, but maybe our UNESCO representative on the panel has a different view on it. It very easily tends to become too diffuse and almost impossible to handle. Whereas if we attack the problems on a more regional scale, it's a more focused effort, and it may be more tangible, more manageable. We are working, for example, in the Red Sea region now. Why are we there? First of all, we're there because the coral reefs, as you know, on a global scale, are dying left and right, and at an absolutely depressing rate. Because primarily, well, there's two factors. There's local pollution and abuse of the corals on a local scale, but then there's also the global effect of global warming, which is stressing the corals and bleaching them, and they're dying. We have discovered very recently that the corals in the Red Sea are extremely resistant to global warming, and therefore actually has a chance of being the last reef standing, if you want, a real functioning coral reef ecosystem by the end of the century for future, that we can preserve for future generations. And this is in the Red Sea system. Now, if you want to, but this is provided, of course, they're resistant to global warming, but they can survive that, provided that we don't kill them with local pollution and local environmental stress in the Red Sea system itself. And that is a challenge on a regional scale in the Red Sea system. And if you look now, then it becomes, the questions become pragmatic. How do we do this? How do we ensure this? And here, of course, we need a marriage between science and diplomacy. On one hand, we need the best possible science, because we cannot protect these ecosystems if we don't understand them properly. On the other hand, if the science lives alone and is not connected to the governmental level and the regional scale where the decision making is happening, and where large scale protection can be implemented, it doesn't have much value. So the marriage between science and diplomacy is absolutely critical there. And the region is manageable. There's 8 countries around the Red Sea. Now, it's a complicated region. Okay, geopolitically, the Red Sea is very complicated. And so that's why we have approached this from a Swiss perspective, creating the Transnational Red Sea Center here in Switzerland to create a neutral partner, which can organize, on one hand, the scientific work that is needed among the scientists in the Red Sea region. And this is very important. It's not us coming to the Red Sea region doing the work for them. We're doing it in direct collaboration with them to create the scientific basis for the protection. And then with a very efficient Swiss diplomacy that we have, and I must say I'm very impressed. We have our ambassador for science and diplomacy here in the audience today. I have been extremely impressed with all the help we have gotten and support we have gotten for this from our ambassador and on all the diplomats in the region, opening the doors at a very high governmental level and beginning to create a dialogue about this very strong common interest that we all have, that these corals will not die. And so this is sort of the reason why we're doing this. But then the question is, if you look a little bit more under the hood, what is actually needed? And I'll be brief because you have other questions to ask other people. But what is actually needed? What are the key ingredients? And I think the key word here to make this happen and function is trust. We need to create trust between the scientists on the ground in this geopolitical environment, and we need to create trust between the governments. And in a geopolitical situation like we have in the Middle East, this is, you know, more necessary there than perhaps in many other places. And how do we do this? Well, we do it by openly sharing the science, the data, and all the information. So there's absolutely, this has to be done. This ocean science protection, in my opinion, has to be done not just in the Red Sea, but in general, with a completely open science principle. So there's no secrets anywhere. Everybody has access to the same information, and therefore can be part of the solution in a completely equal way. So I think these are some of the keywords and some of the key elements that we need to implement. And then we can discuss whether it has to be done on a global scale, whether it has to be on a regional scale, and of course, this has to be adapted, I think, to different situations. I'll stop right there.
Thank you for that. And I think this second question for Antje Boetjes is related to that, this idea of cooperation and collaboration and finding these connections. But we know that 2021 is the decade for ocean science and sustainable development, and it's also the decade for ocean restoration. So how are these two interlinked, and how should we think about them as being part of the same goal?
Right. So to have a UN decade with a goal for science, namely to help with the sustainable ocean, is a special thing. And we are at the moment that it just has started together with the Ocean Decade for Restoration, of course, putting down actions, activities that we could all contribute. And we is here basically international science. So when you think about it, and I'm impressed by what I've just heard from the COVID panel, and also the clarity with which Anders has just introduced the issue with scale, we have to understand that for the question of sustainability of oceans and learning restoration of ecosystems, in many ways we are having a global scale problem. There are also local, regional problems, but let me for a moment stick with to the global problem, because I'm a deep sea biologist, and so I mostly deal with the global good, the common heritage of mankind, the high seas area, the open ocean. The threats of climate change have increased so dramatically for the ocean that the race to protect the ocean species, the network of life in the oceans, the ocean functions, and we have seen in the introduction that it is our life support system, also the oceans. All of that is happening against the climate change issue. The oceans get too warm, too sour, they have heat waves like we have on land, with amazingly destructive results. If you just think this summer, millions and millions of ocean species dead from overwarming along the Pacific coast. There are heat waves that reprogram ocean life so that it becomes pathogens. We are trusting today that there are almost no marine pathogens, no marine viruses that could be a threat to humans, but we cannot be sure. And we have not the knowledge, not the database to understand the genetic life of the oceans and what secrets it has. I will give you just one example from my own research. Since more than 20 years, I work on ocean microbes in the seafloor that are able to consume the greenhouse gas methane. If these microbes wouldn't be there, and no one of us pays taxes to them, that would be a different planet, a planet that would not host human life. We know that. So this is just one example.
Just got us on a cliffhanger there. Give her 2 seconds. Right, we'll get Antje back online in a second, but hopefully let's turn to Vladimir to pick up on that as you are actually, are you back? Okay, Antje, over to you again.
Okay, was I silenced? So, sorry, I just gave the example of my research, how we find secrets about cooperation with marine life, how life has a network where species interact to shape planet Earth at the global scale, where we have species interacting that shape our environment, our life support systems, the way that greenhouse gases are stored in the oceans, the way that oxygen is produced, microbes that know how to make hydrogen boundlessly from the energy of sun and water. And so that knowledge we have not yet tapped into. You have heard in the beginning, we know less than 20%, actually less than 1% of the ocean seafloor map. We know less than 1% of the ocean life. We have 1 billion species of microbes yet to discover. So in our planet Earth, we have this foreign planet, but it is threatened at the same speed as land is threatened by climate change, by overuse, and even in the high seas. The deep sea, very remote from us humans, it's threatened by activities like plastic littering, by warming of the ocean surface because the food sources will be altered, oil spills in the deep sea. So we have to understand that this is one system. And so just as the COVID panel has just said, we have to work on the One Health scale when it's about a disease threatening all of humanity, where there's only peace from that pandemic when we have a solution at the global scale. We have to find global scale knowledge on problems such as species losses, overuses, and climate change to protect the ocean, our life support system. And restoration is key. Restoration means that for every bit that we take from the ocean, every bit that we need from the ocean, we have to learn how to fix what is destroyed, because we count in the ocean as the ultimate carbon sink. We count in the ocean as a store of species DNA. And Earth history shows us that when things have been really bad on land, the life that re-emerged after catastrophe like volcanism and meteorites came from the ocean. So the global scale solution is a political one, is one of cooperation, international cooperation. It's one of enabling, sharing knowledge, and having that right amount of ocean literacy. And for the UN decade, that's my last word, the UN decade for the science of sustainable oceans has a new charge to science, and that is empathy. Raise empathy, love, and emotions for the oceans. Now, scientists are not naturally born the ones that raise empathy, but that's a new task to science that we have to fulfill too.
Thank you very much, Antje. So talking about this global scale knowledge, I mean, this is exactly what you're trying to build, Vladimir, at the IOC with the Sustainable Ocean Decade. And you're actually looking to build this global information system. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Casimira. And I would like, I think, to start by referring to you. You said 18% of the ocean has been discovered. And, you know, we need to really understand what it means. And this basically now means a quotation from one of the activities that we run. So we have a project which is called Seabed 2030. And with that project, we were able to move the percentage of the area of the planet that, of the ocean for which we know the depths with necessary accuracy from roughly 5 to 6% to 18%. This was done in 10 years. But that project started by the Prince Albert I in 1903. So 5% in 1 century. This is how it worked. So we hope that we will be able to cover 100% at least of the depths by the year 2030. Very ambitious. And everything is ambitious here. I think we are now rediscovering the ocean and the fact that we live on the planet ocean, not the planet Earth. You know, the first questions about the charter. Yes, we have a charter. This is a United Nations Convention of Law of the Sea, and probably not many people know that it was, I think, put in the action because of the nodules. People didn't care about the ocean, but when they discovered the nodules, they decided they need the charter. Now we divided the ocean. That was actually the largest redistribution of national jurisdiction in the history of humankind. And we have a data platform as well. For example, Ocean Biodiversity Information System, it exists. But you know, all science of the past, I think, was based on the sense of curiosity and discovery. Now we live basically at the edge of the cliff. And this, there are many dimensions that relate the danger to humankind and to the ocean in this particular moment. I would like also to say that in this video, the quotation is our oceans. Well, there is only one single ocean on this planet. It is connected and it is not our. Probably we belong to the ocean, not the ocean does not belong to us. So And indeed, we need to act, have a global charter. We have to act regionally. As Anders, I really subscribe by what you say, but the situation has changed. And currently, we don't have a very strong plan for the ocean. We have a plan for climate, 1.5 degrees in the Paris Agreement. We have biodiversity targets, including also in the ocean under the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity. But we just basically miserably failed on fulfilling them in the previous generation of that activity. So, and because then we need to set the targets, normal targets, and we need to know what is achievable. And basically the main idea is that we cannot just leave the ocean like it is now. We have to start managing the ocean, like we're managing, for example, cities. That is, we know how water is supplied, how electricity is supplied, how transport is organized. We're using the ocean extensively. So we need to organize our work in the ocean, our life in the ocean. And that is exactly the idea of moving forward through science, ocean planning, or sustainable ocean planning. And already 15 countries subscribed by the idea to move forward. And the decade is basically, in the absence of the charter, is a way for us to organize the knowledge, to increase the knowledge, to start moving towards harmony in our relations with the ocean. Once again, referring to Antti, it's not only about hard science, it's about empathy, about women in science, about early career ocean professionals. So that is a global movement based on our knowledge of the planet and knowledge of the ocean. That's including the digital one that you mentioned. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, I'm going to turn now to Robert Blasiak and ask you about how we go about organizing that knowledge. Then, I mean, you were one of the scientists that advised on the high-level panel for sustainable ocean economy, and you developed these papers on the ocean genome. And I mean, in your view, will we ever have a comprehensive understanding of ocean ecosystems? And how do we design restoration plans when we still know so little? And then with what we have, how do we go about organizing that knowledge? Threefold question there.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kazimierz. I mean, it's a great question, a series of questions, and I'm really inspired by the remarks of the other panelists so far. And they've all underscored it. You know, we're just scratching the surface of the ocean in terms of our understanding. I mean, we know that life has existed in the ocean about 3.7 billion years, around 3 times as long as life on land. And that means there's tremendous diversity in the ocean, and maybe around 2 million species, complex species, but we've only described about 10% of those. So there's a ton left to do. It's a bit of a paradox though, because well, my kind of favorite thing is to talk more about the genetic level, talk about biotechnology, and there we're moving at light speed. It's going so fast. So let me give you an example. 20 years ago, it cost about $6,000 to sequence a base pair of DNA. Today, it costs about 1 cent. And that's meant an exponential growth of genetic data, genomic data that's helping us understand the world, understanding just how much we don't know about some of these systems. And we're applying all of these tools and technologies to the ocean now too, and we're finding amazing things. So it was in the opening video, but one of the really remarkable things is that since the ocean has such a diversity of ecosystems, places where there's no light at all, places where there's insane amounts of pressure, incredible heat, incredible cold, all of that is in the ocean. You also have life everywhere you look. And that life has evolved to thrive in those special locations. And that comes with really special properties, which are encoded in the DNA. And as a result, marine life is full of biotech potential. So the development of marine pharmaceuticals, the deep sea in particular is seen as the next frontier for antibiotic development and everything else. But having all this genetic data, it gives you some understanding, but it also gives you maybe your first step in maybe an entry into the world of stewardship. Because from kind of a theoretical viewpoint, stewardship rests on 3 pillars. It needs to have knowledge. You need to know about the system before you can really be responsible and care for it, take responsibility for it. The second is care. So once you have that knowledge, maybe you start to care. Maybe you don't need to know that much to already feel a connection with the system and want to do something about it. The third one is agency, being able to actually do something about it. And for much of our existence, a lot of the ocean has been kind of out of reach. We haven't been able to access the deep ocean, the really remote parts of the ocean. But as Antje said, now climate change is really reshaping everything. And with new technologies that are allowing the laying of seabed cables across big parts of the ocean, seabed mining, as the next panelist will mention, and other technologies, it's really possible to go down there. And it's possible to explore and even to disrupt and destroy in some cases. So that's where we really need to be careful. We need to have that stewardship hat on from day one when we start working with these things. And I think that that's one of the big challenges moving forward. And it's one of the reasons why scientists raise alarm bells as soon as they hear about any new technologies, any new industries that may be going there. And it's one of the reasons for these precautionary and ambitious measures like protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030. 30%, 2030, it's a catchy slogan, but underlying that is a lot of hard science that says you need to be careful, you need to be humble. Wherever we've engaged with the natural environment, we've faltered, and we need to do better in the ocean than we've done on land. Let's do it.
Thanks very much, Robert. Turning now to our last panelist, Gerard Barron. Antje had talked before about restoration. We take things out of the ocean and being able to understand how to put things back effectively. So what's your position of a company like yours seeking to mine ocean resources on how that should be done? And what's your position on the UN Decade for Ocean Science? And how does mining ocean resources fit into that context, given the science that we know?
Well, good morning, and to my fellow panelists and audience. And before I answer that direct question, I think in the macro sense, can I just take us back a step? Because there's no doubt this is a time when our planet, not just our oceans, but our planet, is absolutely suffering stress. And everyone always agrees the planet will be fine. It's the people on the planet that will struggle. But, we're making a transition, right? A transition to a circular economy. And I want to just talk about something that I often hear, like degrowth and the fact that we can recycle our way there. And I think global energy use and global GDP correlate very closely. And decreasing GDP in this current system correlates with increased violence and more unemployment and disproportionately more harm caused to those people already in poverty. And it makes the debt to GDP ratio worse, driving global economic collapse, which translates to wars and breakdowns in supply chains and infrastructure. So I think we accept the fact that increased energy efficiency paradoxically leads to increased, not decreased, energy use, and so recycling is very energy intensive, and the movement from linear metals to circular, where we can upcycle materials, will require a lot of energy. And that energy is either going to come from carbon sources, which we now know it can't continue to, or it's going to need to come from renewable sources, which require storage. And so getting off those fossil fuels and not collapsing the world in the process requires the electrification of transportation and energy production. And both of those require a lot of batteries, and thus the raw materials needed to make them. So battery metals are a critical step to a post-carbon and closed-loop world. And so now the question is, where are they going to come from? Because a lot of the comments that I hear about our oceans, like we only have identified 10% of the species, applies to land as well. And so we need to really take a planetary perspective and think, where can we find the raw materials, the metals we need to help this move to circularity with the lowest impact on our environment and on society, on people? Because we still have 3+ billion people who cannot afford a bicycle. And this is where science and companies like the metals company work hand in hand. And we're funding science. Other contractors in the CCZ, where thankfully the concentration of battery metals is in one little place, the ones of most interest at least. And so, science and companies like us work hand in hand. We're spending $75 million. And I think that on our science program in the space of 3 years. And that's to baseline, it's to understand what the impacts will be, to understand how we can mitigate those impacts, and then to prepare that into a set of facts that society, or in this case, the International Seabed Authority, can make decisions on. Are these set of impacts more acceptable than those set of impacts? We're entering a trade-off period. And so rehabilitation, of course, is a massive part of that. And when I think about, the precautionary approach to biodiversity, we want to protect 30% of our oceans. I think we should protect more than that, and thankfully, and this is where the conversation about ocean metals gets totally taken off track, particularly by the NGO world, because, there are different types of ocean metals. And I think in the case of nodules, which in the CCZ, there is more area under protected zones than there are under exploration licenses. And so science and commercial contractors, often want exactly the same thing, and that is to have the lightest planetary touch. And so, hence why I'm very happy to be invited to speak to audiences like yours today.
Thanks for that. So before we turn back to the panelists to see if they want to comment on that, we're going to take some questions from the audience. But before we do so, I'd like to invite Mr. Hoffman to wondered if you had a thought about some of those comments. And
well, thank you very much. I'm not quite sure I am singled out, but I'd be delighted to make a contribution on that front. I think that's what we've heard, and which really makes it into obvious. Sorry, what this conversation has really put in evidence is that we are facing a degradation of the marine environment of a scale that had yet been unseen. For the past 250 years, our absolute relentless pursuit of short-term profit maximization has destroyed the planet. And in particular, it's destroyed part of the planet that we don't even know. So we don't even know what we are missing. So the question is, what can we do about it? And one of the things that strikes me as being the important bit is that we need to understand what impacts we are having on the sector. And I think Gerard's point was very well made, that we should be able to manage what we can measure. I think the human ingenuity, and in particular entrepreneurship and private enterprise, has been incredibly efficient at creating what we thought was the solution to our problems by creating value. And this value would then be redistributed to society through taxes and all sorts of other instruments. And that would allow society as a whole to protect common goods and to make sure that we live in a surrounding environment. Well, it hasn't worked. And it's exactly the reason why we need things like GESDA, which will help us to bring towards the diplomacy at that level. And what for me strikes me as being the important bit in that particular conversation we're having today is that there's unknown riches which we are throwing away because we are not looking at the life support system on Earth. And that life system support on Earth is not just the ocean, it's the totality of the sector. So if we can use just a little bit of the ingenuity and creativity we have used to destroy the planet, to regenerate it, to bring it back to a level where we can do something, that would already be a major step forward. And I think that it has to go from private enterprise to public systems. I'm greatly encouraged by the resolution taken yesterday by the Committee for Human Rights, that the right for access to a healthy nature is a fundamental human right. This was passed yesterday by the Council here in Geneva, again, in Geneva, and that is important in the context of GESDA, and it's been subscribed to by a number of governments. So the pandemic has allowed us to realize that our system is not resilient. Let's jump at this opportunity and do something about it. This morning in plenary, we heard Jeremy Farrar telling us, these opportunities to change the planet are going to disappear very quickly. So we must make sure that we capture them when we have them. So the dish is ready, let's put it into the oven.
Thank you very much. We'd like to invite the audience to pitch in and ask their questions. So please do raise your hand and a microphone will come to you.
Yes, good morning, Julien Piton, former ISO treasurer and officer. My question is for Mr. Maibaum. As the tool we have, you haven't talked about the law, and it seems that ocean and international waters is almost no law zone where we can't enforce. Is that not a focus we should tackle in order to responsibilize all the actors in the ocean?
I think that's absolutely a very good question. It's probably a UN question, actually. You know, the ocean, there's a deep ocean, there's the coastal oceans, etc. When you look at the coastal ocean, where the corals are, I don't know my microphone, then, you know, this is usually national waters, okay? And so they're under control. So the coral reefs, for example, which are the hotspots of certainly the tropical and subtropical oceans, and in fact, many of the other zones outside of the tropical ocean, tropical zones are where the richness of life really is concentrated, is in national waters. So here we are dealing with the governments directly. Then there's the big chunks of the ocean, which are probably in terms of area, but not maybe in terms of biodiversity, is international water. And here, as you say, I think you're right. It's basically more or less a lawless zone. It's a little bit like outer space. Right? There is no governance of this. But for us, you know, we are focusing on the coastal zones, and here we are simply dealing with national interests and trying to organize a cross-nation protection of the system. And this is a situation where the diplomacy is absolutely required. There's no escape from it. So yes, again, it's a question of scale and it's a question of distribution, because really the ocean is very heterogeneous. And the vast majority of the biodiversity is actually in upwelling zones and in coastal zones. And so, and this is also, of course, the zones that are closest to human activity, directly impacted by whatever we leave, you know, we let flow straight into it from the rivers and from our cities. So I think if you have to have an urgency response, it has to be focused on the coastal zones.
Just to complement what Anders said, well, you know, I wouldn't say that it's a completely unregulated area. There is a United Nations Convention of Law of the Sea. So, and this is actually a very important instrument because it defines the territorial sea, 12 miles, then 200 miles of exclusive economic zones, then high seas, then the special treatment of seabed, which is considered heritage of, it was supposed to be of humankind. Now it's, it was called mankind's heritage, but I think it's correct to say humankind heritage now, because it was invented in the 70s. And now we are working on a law, on the special law, on protection of marine biodiversity of areas beyond a national jurisdiction. That is supposed to be based on science, but it's also like conventional law of the sea, observation is unclosed. It's like code of the road. So people know where to go, but you know, it doesn't set any targets. The same is true for BBNJ, biodiversity beyond areas of national jurisdiction. It also sets the rules of the game. The targets are not there. And that is a big problem. It has to be done in the coastal waters. And 15 countries decided that they have to address something there of the high level plan for sustainable ocean economy. And we're now embarking on the high seas. So there is, but and people need to know about this, and people need to support that. Diplomacy is critical.
Antje, I see you'd also like to comment on that.
Yeah, so we are beginning to build targets of various kinds, and it's absolutely important to understand that we need that both for the coastal regions as well as in the global areas. And there are targets that we have with the Sustainable Development Goals for life underwater, and this has also been discussed now at the level of the EU and elsewhere, that till 2030 we have 30% of the area protected. Unfortunately, for the targets that we already have in Europe for the coastal realm, we have not, and even the richest, the wealthiest countries have not managed to put that territory aside and really protect it. And the astonishing and shocking thing about the high seas is that where countries have argued for large-scale open ocean protected areas, because they are not appropriately guarded, they have no rangers as the rainforests have, and even they struggle with protection. We often find data from remote satellite surveys of fishing in those protected, seemingly protected areas, that the fishery pressures have increased in those areas because fishermen think if it's protected, there should be more fish. So the inability of our society to give protection to the marine environment, and again, where is the law behind that? It's the precautionary principle. As long as we don't know of the diversity, as long as we have not fully understood the resources that we need to preserve for future generations, we have to act according to the precautionary principle and protect and not give up on those targets that we have. But they need an ambition that is similar as a high ambition as the one to stay under 2 degrees climate goals, because the ocean police, ocean management, especially high seas, does not exist. And most countries, especially the countries with large amounts of coasts that are not even the cause of the problem, but actually suffer from the problem that industrialization has caused, they don't have the means to protect their own coasts, which often goes beyond what individual humans can do. And so it is an international problem of a large global scale that needs fixing. And as was said before, we have to understand the ocean as one with Earth, with climate, with land, with us humans, and not as a separate item that we can care about later when we have fixed all other problems.
Thank you very much. And we'll just see if there are any more questions from the audience here or online.
The questions we had online actually have just been answered to, about law enforcement in international waters and about close to shore ocean parts and deep sea parts. So basically, if anyone has an audience, oh, these were your questions. You had double time.
I think that if we have a moment, I think the points that Gerard raised about metal availability, that is an amazing problem that many people are not aware of. And let's take a moment, because the subject of the metal resources from ocean floor is a big topic that increases in relevance, and it goes often unnoted. And it's often told in the wrong, with the wrong story in the background. So the way we humans use metals is a fascinating problem, and I've recently come to learn about it, that much of the metals we use are in materials, in buildings and constructions, where the rare metals that we have on Earth are built in a way at a nanoscale, at a molecular scale, basically, where we cannot recycle, where we deplete metal resources at an amazing speed. And we don't understand that basically we have to reinvent the way we use materials to get out of this next generation problem. And so I would, if there is no question at the moment to the large scale ocean, I would like to ask you to all try to find out where we are with this problem. It is fascinating and so urgent to work again on many levels. One of the big levels is to understand the role of material science in a sustainable planet. It is overlooked and it really needs enhancement.
Gerard, perhaps before we take a question from the gentleman, just to bounce back on what Antje just said.
Well, I concur, and I think that it's starting to dawn on people just how metal intensive the green transition is going to be. But the good news is that these atoms will be recyclable for millennia. You know, if we can put them into the system in the right way, as Anya says, then they can be recycled. And the good news is that batteries will be recycled more than anything else, I think. I mean, we're not going to pull down our infrastructure to get the metals to build our batteries. But when we, you know, it's going to be the responsibility of the manufacturers to make sure that they do use these recycled materials and that they can take back those materials for recycling. And it will become very, very unpopular to buy new goods that are not made on recycled materials in the future. And so, you know, I think extractive industries have to stop, and they will stop in decades to come. We have to change our ways. And so, but before we can do that, we need to face up to the truth. And the truth is we need to inject a lot of metals into the system to facilitate that. And so from a planetary perspective, where should we get them from? Should we continue to destroy our carbon sinks and our biodiverse habitats? Or should we look at this one little part of the abyssal zone that can provide us certainly all the metals we need to electrify the transportation sector, and then more. But Anya makes a very good point that we need to get a focus on, you know, recyclability and how to move towards circularity.
Robert, I see your hands raised there.
No, I just add, I agree with Antje, and I agree with a lot of what Gerard is saying also. And I think that, to me, one of the most inspiring developments from the last couple of years, we were confronted with the reality that we need rapid decarbonization of the world and the economy. And there we need the metals. But then the question is also, well, do we go and mine more metals, or do we recycle the ones we have? As Antje said, as Gerard repeated, it's not an easy thing. It's not something that can be done at scale now. But one of the most exciting things is all the new development, all of the research and innovation that's going into this space, the development of cobalt-free batteries, the development of new lithium-ion batteries that aren't as reliant on these metals or as high quantities of these metals. So there's tremendous innovation in this space. And it's getting a lot of attention. Just while we're adding things to the list of stuff to worry about, I'll put sand on that list, and ocean sand, because this is the even less sexy than metals, and no one's really caring about it somehow. But so much of well, just look outside your window, wherever you are online or in this room, you'll see concrete everywhere, and the sand is making it possible. And that's a finite resource that takes geological timescales to develop. And a lot of the sand that accumulates at the end of river deltas and things, we've stopped the flow of sand. So it's not accumulating at those levels anymore. We've basically stopped a geological process within the span of human development. And it's not something you can just make more of. You can't go to the Sahara and just scoop up sand. It's totally different, right? So this is another one. As Antje said, material science, that's the real future. And it's not just metals, it's sand and it's other things. And we're reaching those planetary limits really quickly. And you know, maybe we find great deposits of sand under Yosemite or under the Amazon or something. No, we don't chop it down then. This is the time when we need to invest in those research and technology so that we don't get stuck with that thing of, well, we have to go and dig up more of it somewhere else. We just have to get out of that paradigm. It's been our paradigm for the last 150 years. We've got to get out of it.
Robert,
So
you give a great example. We won't rip up the Amazon to get the sand, but we'll rip up the Sulawesi to get the nickel to build the batteries. And this is where we need to take the planetary approach. I mean, I concur with you, but it's going on today, and the impacts of the metals and mining industry is there for us all to witness today. It's just out of sight. Like 190 billion tons of waste was generated last year from the mining industry. Municipal waste was 2 billion globally. So 2 versus 190. And the International Energy Agency says that we need to increase extractive industries by between 500% and 600%. So that means these pristine biodiverse habitats that are our carbon sinks are going to be continually destroyed. And, you know, it's tough. There's some tough choices we face as a society. But this is where the science and commercial endeavor and regulators need to try and keep the narrative on track. We can't let the small, special interest groups try and derail the conversation, because they introduce nonsense to the conversation. Like for the example of degrowth that I gave, imagine putting degrowth forward as a viable alternative with 3 billion plus people living in poverty. It's who are the people who will be most impacted by that? And so, of course, it's the people with the least. And so if inequality keeps anyone up at night, then we need to find a balance. And I hope it keeps everyone up at night. But we need to find a way of increasing standards of living for all. And, the continuing industrialization of the developing world, but in a sensible, careful manner, is something that we should encourage and find a way to allow without destroying our planet. So there's no point protecting the oceans for the sake of destroying our carbon sinks and our most biodiverse habitats. This is where, we have to come together and come up with better solutions.
If I can bring it back to the room, then there was a gentleman with a question in the third row, and we on the far right. If you still had your question, or yeah.
Yes, my question was for Gerard, because we are today, we know the price we had to pay for mining on Earth, okay? All the impact on this planet that we have done. So obviously from people like us, like me, that don't know too much about ocean, we thought that this was preserved because it was covered by water, and no one will jump on exploiting and thinking that all the resources there are just to be taken away and put in our system. How can you convince that time has come to go and dig underwater, having another impact that we have had on the surface? Because this, we know now, all what we've taken out from Earth, we paid zero from it. Okay, it was given to us by Earth, and no, we paid the investment to go and dig, but very often we never paid back we never bought any coal. Planet never sent us a bill for coal. Planet never sent us a bill for iron. Planet never sent us a bill for gold. The price is about human profit and human costs. So yes, how do we protect ocean if you go mining them?
Well, firstly, by having good actors in the game, by having responsible companies, like I'd say the metals company is, because that care about the ocean, that invest in the science, that engage independent science to help us understand impacts. And we can't look at this through a very, very tiny lens. We have to look at it from a life cycle assessment. So we have to look at it from a CO2 perspective, from a sequestered carbon, from a biodiversity, from the impact on fresh water systems, on the alternative uses for land. And it's only when we can do a full analysis on a life cycle, from a life cycle perspective, can we then look at those set of impacts and look at the known set of impacts that are happening today for some of the examples you use. And keep in mind that, we think about land-based mining, and the idea of doing those same things in the ocean would be horrific, I could never support that. But this is where education is important as well, because I hold in my hand what we're focused on, these polymetallic nodules, and they literally lie on the ocean floor. And we don't dig or tunnel our way to find them. They literally sit there like this. And so we have to engineer the way that we can collect them with the lightest touch, the greatest efficiency in the lightest touch. And the other amazing thing is when we process these and turn them into battery metals, we generate zero tailings and zero waste stream. So it's a very unique resource that offers benefits that land-based ore bodies do not offer. And so I concur with you that if we look at the impact of, or the unintended consequences of burning fossil fuels and of course, remember the example I gave that extractive industries are forecast to increase by 500%. And of course, a lot of this happens in places that are out of mind, out of our ice shot. So we don't know the full impacts until it's too late. And people sometimes say the same about the deep ocean, of how will we know what's going on? By having responsible actors. You know, we're developing our digital twin, which will give the regulator and civil society a window into what we're doing. You know, we want our future generations to be proud of this activity. I know that we need to be held to a very high standard, that we'll have the eyes of the world on us every day. We won't be out there, you know, doing things that people won't be able to see. That time has gone. It's gone. My own children would not allow me to do it. And I think from a society perspective, I want people to be thinking about ocean metals as they want to buy products that are made with these metals because they come with a light of planetary touch. They have less impact on communities and people and lives. So you're right to be concerned, but the answer is to get more knowledge, I think, and for us to be better at communicating that knowledge and for us to collaborate with science. There needs to be more trust. And I think there is a lot of trust. I mean, we have 5 expeditions this year to the CCZ. We have one on the water right now. It's a boat full of 62 people. Majority of them are scientists. You know, that's our 5 campaigns we'll be running like that this year. It's a 6.5-week campaign. You know,
comments, Gerald, sorry to cut you off there. We've got 1 minute left before the end of this panel, so I'm going to steal the floor for that 1 minute. And just to wrap things up and bring things back to our original question about how to better govern the ocean and prevent its overuse. So picking up from what you said there, we need that knowledge before anything else, but then we also need to organize our life in the ocean, like Vladimir said, as we organize cities here. So we need that level of organization. We also need, science needs to be a prerequisite for any plan that we make and for any restoration plan. And we also, like Antje said, we need empathy. We need, everyone needs to understand their role or the role of the ocean in their life. So not just scientists and the wider community, but the general public as well. And that's also, like Gerald was saying, understanding where our metals and our materials come from. And like Anders said, we need to think about the global, working together at a global scale, but also on a local scale as well. And so with some of these points, we've gone through a lot today, and I hope everyone got something out of this panel. Thank you very much for your participation, and thank you to Mr. Hoffman as well. And with that, we'd like to close with just a reminder to take a look at the Breakthrough Radar, where you can find more information on this topic as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.